What is going on, guys? We are back playing some more Surviving with Botania, and today we're going to be setting up the Gourmaryllis. So the Gourmaryllis is an extremely powerful mana generating flower that, quite frankly, just really likes to eat. The only thing that's important to keep in mind, though, is it's a pretty picky eater. So feeding it the same food over and over again is going to eventually net you basically 0 mana, which is obviously a problem. And that's what leads to all the very cool setups that come along with this flower. And it's a nice one because you can start out with it very early on, and as long as you're feeding it 2 different kinds of food interchangeably, well then you're going to end up with a decent mana production. You can scale that up though all the way to 8 different unique kinds of food, and you will end up almost doubling the mana you get from every kind of food in the end, because you get a benefit the more unique kinds of food you're feeding to it. So you can pretty much scale this setup up all the way from early game to late game and make it one of the most potent mana generating flowers there is available. Now today we're going to be going over a 4 food Gourmaryllis setup, which is still very easy to do. Anything above that and it starts to get a little bit more complicated, but this is very compact, very basic on the redstone, and I think it can all be done in a simple 3x3 area using probably less than 10 different blocks, which is great. The one important thing to note is we are not going to be going over how to automate the production of food today. You can choose whatever foods you want, and we'll go over how you can adjust it accordingly. But either way, we're not going to go over the automation of the food today. That's going to be up to you. As you can see in my inventory, I've got 4 different types of food here, some good ones, some not so good ones that we had lying around the base, and those will be what we're using just for an example today. And maybe later on in the series, we'll go over automation of food production using things like cows with specific Botania flowers. As for the requirements for today's episode, those can be seen in the chest right here. Feel free to pause the video if you want to make sure you have everything necessary to follow along with today's build, but we should be good to grab out all this stuff and start crafting. Okay guys, so all the crafting should be done, and if we take a look at my inventory, like I said earlier on in the episode, there's really not that much that goes into this, which is great because this can net you a ton of mana, especially if you supply it with better foods than I'm doing right now. Steak is basically going to be one of the best, obviously cooked chicken is good, apples and rotten flesh really not that much, but either way, I had them laying around here, so I figured we might as well get rid of them. Obviously, we got the tree farm over there, and there is an abundance of zombies that bother me because I have not properly closed in my base yet. We're getting there, slowly. I'm starting to put roofs on and stuff, but either way, we have pretty mediocre food, so you can scale this up to be even better at mana generation than what we have today for the same simple setup. And to start out, we are going to grab out our floating Gourmaryllis, and you're just going to pick where you want this setup to go. Like I said, it's going to be a 3x3 area that this is going to work in, and the Gourmaryllis will be at the center. So I'm just going to place it down right here, and you can see the working area of the Gourmaryllis, because we have the monocle on, is a 3x3 area around it. So the food needs to be dropped relatively close to where this actually is, meaning that we do need to actually keep the setup pretty compact. Now what we're going to be doing is using 4 different droppers to drop the 4 different kinds of food. So we want to get these at least a little bit in the air. So I'm going to build up 1 from the Gourmaryllis, and then I'm just going to dig down here so that I can place these down, facing down into the ground, so that when they drop the items, they're simply going to drop them straight down right next to the Gourmaryllis. Now you can raise these up higher if you want to, or you can have them drop it into the center. I just think it looks better when they drop it straight onto the ground. And then we're just going to do this with all the different sides of this. So have all 4 in all 4 directions around the Gourmaryllis. And I'm a little bit stuck under here, so now we can get out, and then we can just fill that back in, and now all of our droppers are good to go. So if we want to, we can fill these up with the different kinds of food. So we're going to put apple in here, we're going to put some rotten flesh in there, we're going to put the steak in there. Actually, let's put the chicken in this one, and let's put the steak right here. So now all the droppers are set up to drop the food, and you can reduce the number of droppers in here if you do not have four different types of unique food that you actually want to use for this, but definitely don't duplicate. So basically, if you have something like, you know, steak, don't put steak here and steak here where they're going to consecutively be dropped. You should be fine if you can put one here and one on the opposing side, but definitely don't put them adjacent to each other with droppers that are going to fire one after another, because then you will start getting reduced mana, because the more times you feed the same food to the Gourmaryllis, the less mana you're going to get, basically all the way down to 0 mana, and then you are just wasting food. Whereas, like I said earlier, if you're able to feed different kinds of food in a row, you start to get a multiplier that goes up, increasing the amount of mana you get. So there's a typical equation for mana generation from food, and as you go up, there's going to be an increasing coefficient that gets you up to, I believe, 80% additional mana when you have 8 different unique foods being chained together. So if you can imagine that, you're going to almost double your mana generation if you can get 8, and around 4, I think we're probably around like 50% or something more mana, which is definitely nothing to scoff at for such a compact setup. Now that we have this though, the next thing we need to worry about is the redstone, and the redstone is very simple. We're just going to be using a hovering hourglass, an animated torch, and some sand. So we can hop on up to get up here, and we're going to want to have left this cobble or whatever block we put down here to place the droppers in the center. If you don't have a block there because you placed the droppers a little bit differently than I did, well then I'd place one down there for now, because we're going to be placing the animated torch right on that. And you can see it triggers the first one pretty much right away. It drops the rotten flesh, and the Gourmaryllis ate it. So that's working fine. But the animated torch, if you don't know, is basically a torch that when given a redstone signal is going to change direction. And the way it changes direction is going to be based on the setting you have on it. So the toggle is going to make it flip back and forth from this direction to this direction and then back. We're going to set it to rotate, which is just going to go that, then that, then that, and just rotate through all 4 different cardinal directions. That's what we want, because that'll hit all 4 droppers in sequence like we planned. Now you do also have a random one, but obviously we don't want that here, because that's going to risk that we're not properly getting all the way through our 4 different foods in a row before circling back to the first one. So we're going to want it on rotate. And basically, this is going to rotate 90 degrees whenever it gets a redstone signal. And we can easily do that by putting down a hovering hourglass right above it and then filling this with a certain amount of sand. Now, I say that because the next important thing, and again, I'm not going to go over the specific equations. You can look these up if you want to. But basically, for every haunch of food you get, a full haunch, obviously 1 hunger is half a haunch, at least by, terminology, specific terminology. A lot of times I refer to hunger as a full haunch, but technically I guess 1 hunger is half a haunch. But for every haunch of food that you get back from whatever you're eating, it is going to take the Gourmaryllis 1 second to consume. Now, when the Gourmaryllis is consuming that food, if any other food is dropped, it will consume that food, but it will generate no mana, because all the mana from the Gourmaryllis comes out when it's finished consuming the food. It usually burps in a very loud manner, and then you are going to get your burst of mana, meaning that you need to make sure that no additional food is dropped, because it'll just get eaten up and totally wasted. So if you think about it, you can figure out exactly how long it's going to take for whatever your highest food is going to be. So in our case, it's steak. Steak is going to give back 8 hunger or 4 haunches, meaning 4 seconds will be taken to consume this. I think apples are 2 haunches, so 2 seconds. Rotten flesh, I don't even know. And I don't want to place the sand. I want to access this dropper. I think cooked chicken is 5, 6 maybe hunger, so 2.5 or 3 seconds. I don't really know. But either way, you want to make sure that the highest time is taken into account when you're setting the time for your hourglass, because you need to take into account the time for the Gourmaryllis to eat it, and then ideally for the Gourmaryllis to send the mana to whatever mana pool you're using. So for me, 12 seconds is going to be fine. That should be pretty much for any setup. 12 seconds should be sufficient. So 12 sand. I think you can probably get away with maybe about 10 seconds, depending on what you're using, or even lower if you have really bad food that's in here. But I say 12 is a safe bet. And now, before we put this in, because it's going to start turning the animated torch, we need to put down our mana collection. So we're going to take our mana pool and our elven mana spreader. And the reason I'm using an elven mana spreader is simply because I want to transfer the mana as fast as possible. Could use a Gaia one technically, we have spirits now, but I think this should be fine. So mana pool, mana spreader right here, and then we are just going to bind these together. As always, I like to put my mana spreader directly next to the mana pool and then transfer it from this on, simply because this will be way faster when it is directly adjacent to the mana pool, because there is travel time. So if you're concerned with not being able to get all the mana out of the Gourmaryllis in time for the next food, your fastest method to do that is going to be an elven, well, technically a Gaia mana spreader, but an elven is probably the most I can expect you guys to be willing to put into these, especially if you're using multiple of these setups, right next to a mana pool. So then we just need to make sure our Gourmaryllis is bound to the mana spreader, and you can see the mana that it got from the rotten flesh gets fired in here. It was like 2 bursts, maybe not even, and so definitely not that much from the flesh, but we're not using that for the food. We're using it for the multiplier on the better foods over here and here. So really, if you have additional food, like I said, use those for the multiplier. Even if the food itself is so bad, just use it to benefit your other foods. So now that should be the whole setup. So we can get rid of this cobblestone right here. I'm trying to break it really slow. I have way too much Enigmatica 6 on the mind where my pick is really strong. Here we have the Terra Shatterer, but it's definitely not that fast. So I'm like paranoid about breaking that and all the stuff behind it. But either way, you only know that if you watch both series. But we should be good to throw our sand into the hourglass and let this thing run now. So we'll dump it in there. And now it'll start going, and I did rip down the Endoflame setup over here, so I'll have to reconnect the plates to, a spark system. I may just put it above this mana pool, but I definitely need to automate the production of some of this food. But either way, we can see the Gourmaryllis ate the food. You can see the particle effects. It burped, mana comes out, mana goes in here, and then it's good. Now, we'll watch and see the timing for the steak, so you can see right here, it's taking way longer to eat the steak, and it's got a lot more mana coming out of it. And so that's pretty much right where it finishes off. Now, if it had gone through this full cycle, well, then it would be at a better spot for the steak. So we'll get a little bit more steak mana the next time around, but it's almost perfect. So 10 to 12 seconds is probably your sweet spot, especially if you're using something like steak. But the mana generation from this is nothing to scoff at. Obviously, you're going to have to let it run for a fair bit because a lot of the time it's going to be spent consuming the lesser foods like apples and rotten flesh. But in the end, you will get a lot of mana for really not investing that much food. And if you can automate the production of these using something like cooked chicken is really, really, really easy to do. Apples we get from our tree farm. You could get things like melon slices is another easily automatable one just with vanilla. All of those things can be put in here, and you can have tons of these. They are super compact setups, like I said. At least the setup itself is in the 3x3. You could technically move this, so it's also both within a 3x3 area. But you can make tons of these in a very compact area, and I think it looks pretty clean. But I think that's pretty much it for today, guys. I know this was a little bit of a shorter video, but that's pretty much because the Gourmaryllis is a very simple and very effective mana generation source. So later on in the series, I might do an 8 food setup. If people want me to go over that, let me know in the comments, but 4 food is really going to be your sweet spot for mid to late game if you don't want to invest that much time into automated food production setups outside of this setup itself. And if you have other mods, that's really easy to do. If you have vanilla, well, it's a little bit more of a pain, especially to get 8 foods. I don't even know if there are 8 fully automatable foods in vanilla Minecraft that you can get the finished product all the way out without having to do any work. But either way, that's going to be it for today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, be sure to subscribe so you never miss out on a future one as they come out every Monday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do apologize for the lack of Botania videos, but they should be back into the mix now, and I will talk to you guys later. Oh my gosh, why does every one of my neighbors have to have dogs that bark at every other dog?